Hey, welcome back to Bed Build Part 2. I believe at this point I had just about all the components completely assembled. And here on the footboard, I had pre-sanded the majority of the components. Of course, this top rail had clamping pads against it as it was being assembled. So this didn't get sanded. I can sand it now. And here, using that glorious low raking light to find any flaws, bit of a low angle block plane to chamfer the edges. Fabulous. So these positioners were a bit of an afterthought, and they will help the footboard slip into place, and I'll show more on that here in a bit. So I took a square piece of wood and I drilled this at the lathe so it would be really accurate, perpendicular. It needed to be accurate because I don't have a lot of room to go through this piece of wood and this panel to accommodate one of these dudes. So I certainly don't want to go through the other side, right? So with that, I can start this hole. This hole was marked by drilling through the pedestal into this footboard to mark this location. I'm gonna put a little spacer here just so that doesn't push down on that, okay? I can just start that and then utilize this guy. I added a little shim because I didn't want to have to readjust this depth. It's set. It was a little deep, so 1/32 spacer. Accuracy counts, man. And I can just put this in place. I know that's going to be square. Ooh, that's kind of scary. Oh, that would be crazy horrible if I went through. And then I'll use the epoxy and drive these guys in. But first, put a little countersink. About like that. That way this flange will flush up. So, yeah. And I'm always careful not to get glue on the internal threads, right? And then a bit of lacquer thinner to remove some of that residual epoxy. Okay, so you can see some shims down there, spacers I should say, to account for the different offsets. Here's an offset. More shims here, different size spacers. And then these cleats, you can see how I've got a bevel, so that will feed into this location a bit easier. Let me show you. Just like that. And so the goal is to have this bed completely able to be assembled without any tools. It'll just have a series of knobs to hold all the components in place. So it should work well. This is my signature handle, and I get a lot of requests for it. It's quite ergonomic. I love making it. It's pretty simple. I do have a link in the description on another video on how I make these. By now it's no secret that I love a belt sander. All these parts were cut at, well, the top banding was cut at the table saw. I never ran it through a sander or joiner or anything. I just figured I'd do it last. Saves time, gets all the parts the same size and smooth with one fell swoop. And yes, everything stays nice and square. So I decided to add these labels on the drawer boxes, and technically I should have done these as, when they were just single parts, drawer sides. But the drawer boxes were built, and it was pretty easy to do with a Shaper Origin. I love this thing, and this guy here, Sean Kirsch with Shaper Origin, has helped me tremendously It's a fabulous tool. Found some photos of the recent IWF show, and my buddy Sean, I have learned a ton from him, and he caught me blowing kisses at my bro Phil Morley. Had a chance to use the new shaper plate to cut in my logo. Man, what a blast of a time that was, yeah? Anyway, make your day amazing. So that was a little excerpt from an Instagram post, and here I made my own version of the shaper plate since I haven't got mine quite yet. Made a simple jig to mark the holes for undermount drawer slides. I used to have this guy, but it registered off the outside, and if you use different thickness, that won't work. So register off the inside makes more sense. Of course, this one's bloom, orange. This one's for the grass. They are slightly different, but anyway, quick and easy. And then with that, I can just use one of these automatic punches. Boom. Nothing too tricky here, but if you're going to be doing multiples, I like to make a little story pole so I can quickly mark the domino locations. These boxes were assembled with rabbets, glue, and only two 23 gauge pins, so I'll add these dominoes for strength. Since my material is relatively thin, I had to add this Dock Plate XL by Seneca Woodworking, and I also have the 90-degree deck that I make and sell for greater stability. This is probably well known, but an easy way to gang multiple parts is to just tape them together. That way they're all the same size. I needed about 64 of these 1.1" shop-made dominoes, and this just made it quick and easy. So if you haven't seen my method for adding dominoes for strength on drawer boxes, this is fantastic. I like to wet the dominoes, and that reduces surface tension. The glue will absorb into the dominoes better, I believe. And add glue to the mortises, of course. Hammer everything close to flush. Wipe everything clean. Well, at the risk of showing something obvious, I like ganging parts like this, these narrow parts. Instead of using a sled or making a sled, just gang them all together. You can run them all through at the same time. This may be well known, but again, if this helps somebody out there, mission accomplished. And if you look closely, you'll notice that I have two backer boards, and that will greatly reduce or prevent splintering out. Almost a little loose, actually. Not sure why. But, oh, I know why. That was my sample piece. That one didn't count. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, this is my sample that I made it. I cut it a little bit big. But anyway, so yeah, at a pinch, you can gang them together like that. Back them up. No tear out. Very effective. Lots of ways to do things, yeah? I absolutely love this jig. This is a jig that I use for my signature continuous handles. And I can mark these and cut them at the bandsaw and then run them through the router with a flush trim bit to create that detail at the ends. So I have two of these jigs. One of them creates a smooth sweep at the handle, and this one is more of a angled notch because it's a arts and crafts or mission style set of furniture. But it's easy to set the jig in the vise. I wedge the gap open so I can put the handles in easily and mark them all. Then I'll take them over to the bandsaw, make those cuts, and then clean everything up at the router. Of course, the design of the jig is to be able to route downhill by flipping the handle over to route each end. All right, so when I had made that last video, I didn't have this plexiglass yet. So I just ordered some plexiglass and I cut out this Pac-Man shape that registers on there. And some different knobs. And I love this thing. It's really simple, but very effective. Vacuum hose, of course. And then I added a magnet for easy storage. So easy to make, works well, effective, quick and easy. Those are the kinds of jigs that I love. So what I've got here are some 5-piece doors and drawer fronts. And I need to cut them to size. They're all big by about 3/32, 1/8 inch, something like that. So I can, effectively take a 16th or so, about 1.5 millimeter all the way around to get the final size. Now, I don't want to just start cutting these because when you're doing this type of a glue up, you can get rails or stiles that don't seat all the way, and maybe one of these would be bowed in or bowed out. Typically they're bowed out because you're clamping, here and here, and this might not seat all the way. Incidentally, I need to mention that this is a veneered panel, so I glue that in solid. If this was a floating panel, a solid wood panel, it wouldn't really apply, although it still kind of does. You got to make sure that that these are straight before you start cutting them. Case in point, this piece here, if I went to put it against this crosscut fence and that rail is bowed, then I really don't have a quality reference. So what I've done is I've ran the bottom rail on all my doors and all my drawer fronts. After I've sanded them, I've sanded these to my first stage. These have all been flushed up with a belt sander. That way they're not rocking on the table saw. And then I took it to the joiner and ran just the bottom rail. Now I have a dead straight reference, and I can start. I can make that cross cut, and I want to make my cross cuts first, and I'll tell you why in a bit. So I'll make that cross cut, and I can flip it over, make this cross cut, and then ultimately running this against the fence, I can make them all the same height or whatever size I need. Now the reason I want to start with my cross cuts is because this tailing end is going to tend to splinter out slightly. Yeah, I could back it up, but let's disregard that for now. If I start with these cuts, this splinters out slightly, and then this ultimately gets cut last, and it would remove any of those slight chip outs. Make sense? Here you can see this top rail, and this has been jointed because that's the bottom. See that small gap? So I know that this rail is dipped in right there. Not a very quality reference. As I mentioned earlier, they're usually bowed out. This one's also bowed in that area, but I think you get the point. All right, so with one good quality reference, I can make the first cut on the end. It'll splinter out very little. It's a new blade. Flip it upside down. Set my stop, cut the other end, and that little bit of splintering will now be removed when I make the rip. All right, so I'm getting these handles attached, right? And even when I'm nailing these, you can see I'm using a 23 gauge, but I don't just nail it anywhere, just haphazardly. I'm putting that pin right in that grain. See there? Right in that dark grain. Again, right in that grain, missed a little bit, but so when I add a little bit of color putty to that, it's going to be easy to blend because I don't have to have different colors. I can find the dark grain, something that matches, and then just do them all. So nothing too tricky here. I have a bunch of holes to cut in these mattress platforms, and I just take them outside. And I'm using a jig, and I can recycle that jig. I start with the larger holes first, and using pocket holes, I can assemble that and just make smaller and smaller holes. I take it outside just to reduce all that sawdust. That would just make a huge mess in my shop, yeah. And there's two halves to the mattress platform. I just put them face to face and did them both at the same time, since all those cuts are identical, but just reversed. All right, here's a drawer handle. Let's zoom in, and I really have to take my time to get these handles flush with the surface of the door or drawer front. And I'm using this StewMac scraper, which I absolutely love. It doesn't bend, of course, but it's still easy to control. And I can put tape on one edge at one end, right? And then I can kind of swivel that scraper to effectively scrape that glue flush and also the wood of the handle flush with the drawer or door front. Works extremely well. And you may have noticed that the rails go all the way across the door as well as the handles, and so I don't have any end grain to deal with, or cross grain. Sure makes it easier. And here I'm using something that's about a 1/2 inch, which matches that radius or diameter of the router bit used to clean up that handle, and I can get inside that little cove, make quick work of sanding everything nice and flush. So here I'm using some heavy paper to protect the panel. I think regular typing paper is 20 pound. They also make a 67 pound like a cardstock. And with that, I can use it to protect the panel from getting cross-grain scratches as I ease the corners on those rails and style components. So occasionally, weather permitting, I will spray outside. If the timing is right, time of year is right, there's not any bugs, of course no dust, and the lighting is perfect. And I didn't quite get the finished shots done by the time I was making this video, so those will be in my next video, and I have a cool little surprise to show you. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. Remember to click, like, subscribe, learn,